now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Thank you so much, Becky, and welcome one and all to another episode of the Ted Wallachin Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us, not only this day, but in the past that you have. We appreciate that, and we appreciate the fact that you've been introducing the podcast to some of your friends. My guest this week completed recently a very successful career in broadcasting, both on air and as an executive in some of the largest corporations, broadcast corporations in this country. Several years later, he decided to put pen to paper, and he's just released his first novel titled Like a River to the Sea. This was a novel inspired, strangely enough, by the death of his father nearly 50 years ago, and the conversations that he shared with his dad in his dad's final days. It's fascinating stuff. Again, it's called Like a River to the Sea. My guest, Paul Fisher. How are you?
I'm very good, Ted. Very nice to see you. It's been a while since us old radio guys have bumped into each other at functions.
I know. There was it's one of the great things about the industry that we used to run into each other. You'd run into, because inevitably there's some kind of a charity event going on or an industry event going on, and you get to see people who are your quote enemies, right? Because they work across the street on another part of the dial, right? And I
Yeah,
never really considered anybody in the industry who didn't work in the same building as I to be an enemy. I always thought that we had the same thing in common, hatred for management. But then again, you spent a lot of time of your great career. You're as in management. We'll talk a little bit about that before we'll definitely talk about the book, because it's a fascinating topic to begin with, and how you got to that point is an even more interesting and exciting story. You're originally from London, England. I did not know that,
yeah.
but I do
We
now.
came over when I was around 8, so the accent it dissipated rather quickly.
And I was going to ask you that. I'm glad you mentioned how old you were, because sometimes this comes up in conversation where people come over from different countries at a young age and they never lose their accent.
Well, I have something to add to that. I read into that over the years, and apparently 13 is the magic age. If you move from one country or one language to another, if you do it prior to age 13 approximately, you will probably adapt to the new country and the new language. If it's after
Uh huh.
13, all bets are off, and chances are you're going to retain your language, your accent, as it were.
I knew I'd learn something fascinating talking to you today. I mean, I know there's still more to come in this interview, but I didn't realize. So that's an interesting point, because oftentimes you get people, and they're usually the kind of the haters of society, kind of like, why don't you get rid of your accent already, man? You've been here 30 years,
Well, I'll tell you very quickly. When we moved over here, my grandmother, who was also born in England, grew up in England, and she died at 100 several years ago. Retained
Mm.
that British accent right up until her very last breath, and yet when I came over at 8 years of age, she said, "Nice people don't speak that way here. You have to change your voice." And I had a Cockney accent at 8.
And yet, and this came up in conversation, as I mentioned, and recently with some friends, and we were talking about the fact that guys were jealous when you met somebody who went to school that you went to school with, who had a British accent, because women would were drawn to them like a magnet, like, oh, what a beautiful accent, oh, I love that accent, or an Aussie
Yeah,
accent, and
thank goodness for the Beatles
that,
back
yeah,
then.
yeah, exactly. But then there's the British accent, then there's like a Cockney accent, and that's like there's a whole bunch of different accents in there
Oh,
at the same
well,
time,
when
right?
I came over, I had to write things out for my teachers. I remember I went to school in Downsview when we moved to Toronto, um, and they couldn't understand what I was saying, and it was crystal clear in my head, but obviously not
Uh-huh.
to them.
I had a teacher in grade school. Mrs. McDonald was her name, and she was from England, and she taught me grades 1 through 3, I believe. And it wasn't until grade 4 that I realized that the dot at the end of a sentence with a tail on it was a comma. I always thought it was a comma because that's the way she pronounced it. And I said, "Well, what's a comma? It's like a period with a tail on the bottom of it. Oh, a comma."
Well,
But anyway, enough of that. Did you have a passion for radio as a kid growing up? Was it something that because I got bit at a young age?
well, I remember hearing the Beatles the first time, and I think I was still in England. It was around 63, and I was going to be a rock star initially at
Of
the age of
course.
8. As I got into my teens, I think my practical side kicked in, and it was, well, am I going to be a rock star? Or am I going to be the guy who plays the rock stars on the radio? Well, that one has a
Right.
regular paycheck, so I think I'll do that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to be rock star slash doctor slash lawyer.
No,
I figured I had room for 3 careers in my
the
mind,
legal side never
and
appealed to me, but medicine I thought about a few times, but far too much work for a 14-year-old.
so when did you think that the radio could be something that you might actually make a living
I,
at?
I think it was around 15 or 16. And, that was back in the day when, Chum AM was the big station in Toronto. Well, CFRB was,
Sure,
of course, but I mean, musically, Chum
for us at
was
that
that,
age, yeah,
yeah. And then, Chum FM came on the scene, and the people who were there, like David Pritchard and David Marsden and Jim Bauer and Peter Griffin. I hate doing that because I always miss a few people, but
yeah,
those
yeah,
those stalwarts of the late '60s, Tim Thomas and others, and I thought, wow, I can't believe you get paid to do that. And my
yeah.
first radio job, I actually offered to do it for free. I said, take me on for a month. Don't pay me. If you like me, hire me, minimum wage. You don't like me, you've lost nothing.
Yeah.
So I think I was around 15 or 16, and I was listening to those late night radio shows with Marsden and David Pritchard and others overnight. You know some of these names. Some of your audience may not know
Sure.
all of them, but yeah,
And
that
when
was when I thought, hey, I could maybe make a living at this.
and what was your first job? Where was it?
First job was in a little station in Oshawa, which is now called, I think, Rock 95. But back then it was CKLB was the AM, and CKQS, later CKQT was the FM. And, we played Montavani and the 101 Strings and just the worst music.
Yeah,
But,
stuff that elevators reject.
it was, yeah, it was my introduction to elevator music. And here I was programming it at, 18 or something.
So you went into programming at that age?
Well, at that station, you basically did everything. We
Sure.
had
Yeah.
we had a fellow who was the program director named David Lennox, who you may know from old RB
Sure.
days, and we picked our own music, we wrote our own scripts, we did everything. We were our own production department. So yeah, you ended up picking the music. Um, doesn't happen anymore.
No, but it's interesting because when I talk to young people today who occasionally will ask me for advice because they still want to get into radio, and I still believe that it's a viable place to be. Um, I tell them, I said, learn to do pretty much everything
Oh yeah.
because I mean, I've done virtually every shift I think in a radio station over a course of 24 hours. I briefly did news when Jane Houghton was on maternity leave. And I did sports for a while as well, and then music and FM and talk radio, and you just learn to do everything,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And sometimes you find it. Well, geez, I like this a lot more than I thought I would like it.
Well,
Like I didn't
it's a passion
go
ultimately.
ahead. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It has to be
Back.
because it's so frustrating at
Well,
times.
it is, and if you want to get rich, there's a lot of other ways you can do it besides getting into radio, which is Back in the day, I guess you could do it. Nowadays, there's a few doing very well, but the industry's changed so much. But back in my early days, I mean, we'd work 12, 14 hours a day. We didn't care, and you
Yeah.
didn't get paid after 8 hours, so you just keep working, keep doing. And later in life, I'd have people starting out going, "Well, you want me to work all those hours?" I'm going, "Man, work as many as you can. Work until you're going to drop. That's where you learn everything."
That's right.
However,
That's right. I mean, I recall I went to Seneca College and I was halfway through the second semester and got a job offer in Brampton at Chick Radio,
the
and
Allen
I
brothers.
the Allen brothers. Yes, I mean, you what a, what a great way to learn how crazy this industry. This is how nuts your life's going to be, Ted. Stay tuned for this. They're quite a collection of people they were.
Yes, they were.
But I remember going to my the course director and him saying to me, um, "Take the job, Ted. You'll learn more there in 3 months than we can teach you here in 2 years."
I,
And that's with all due respect to educational institutions.
there are certain jobs where you need to just learn hands on, and I think radio is one of them. Media in
And
general,
so
but radio, yes.
the transition from going from on air to corner office, as it were,
Yeah.
was that something that was a goal of yours, or did you sort of fall into that? Because sometimes in this industry, you fall into
Yeah,
jobs.
I've certainly fallen into enough things over the years, but that was premeditated. um,
Yeah.
I remember starting out thinking, well, I want to be an announcer because they're so cool and so on. And then you realize after a few years, well, they've got somebody telling them what to do. So I want to do that job. And then,
Yeah.
so you become a program director. Well, the program director's got somebody telling them what to do. So then you become a general manager. And now you think you're in charge of things. So then you realize the general manager's got somebody in charge of them. So
Mm.
after a while, I thought, I'd rather be the person making the decisions than the person carrying them out. And that's kind of what it came down to. And as long as I was able to be creative, I loved being in management. And in fact, I loved every day in radio. I haven't done radio for a few years now, but uh, I don't think I worked a day in my life throughout my entire career because everything was just
No.
such a pleasure to do for the most part.
Being somebody who came from behind the microphone to a management position, at least when you were dealing with the people below you, you could understand where their heads were at, and you could understand where they were coming from because you were there.
Absolutely. And, it's sometimes a tough transition. It's like going from being one of the players to suddenly you're the head coach on the team. And
Yeah,
all people can remember is what a lousy player you were,
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah,
But no,
but the great,
it was a
but
transition.
it just
Transition.
being a great hockey player doesn't necessarily make you going to be a great coach, right?
Exactly,
I mean,
and vice versa. And I harbor no doubt that I made my share of mistakes at the beginning because it's a very different headspace. And as you say, just because you're good on one side of the mic doesn't mean you'll be good on the other side. Hopefully, over the
given
years, I've proved enough. But
Yeah. Do you recall the first time you had to fire somebody? Because that must have been an incredibly difficult thing. Because I think that's one of the things that I always thought to myself
it's a.
that as much as I'd like to be in management, I wouldn't be able to do that
I think the first
unless I
person.
really hated the person.
No, and you know what? I never hated anybody, and certainly not in that role at all. But the very first person I fired, I think I was shaking more than them, and it was terrible for both of us. But it's one of those necessary things. It doesn't matter if you're in radio management, any kind of management.
Yeah, sure.
Industries are adapting or not adapting, and changes need to be made. And one of the tough parts about suddenly being on the other side of that mic, on the other side of that desk, is people who are your friends. The industry's changing and they're not, and you're trying to bring them along, and it makes for some difficult relationships at times. I still wouldn't change a thing, but there were some tough decisions and tough days with that transition. Absolutely.
If you owned a radio station today, would you insist that the person who became a program director or a general manager was somebody who came from behind the microphone at one point or another?
At one time, I would have said yes, but I don't know that that's the case anymore because, with an industry like radio, people keep talking about how radio is dying and it won't be around in X number of years. And I don't agree with that. What I agree with is radio is a communication platform. And so
Yeah,
what you hear on the radio in a couple of years' time, you may not hear on the FM band or the AM band. But let's face it, what you're doing right now, you're a mini radio station. You're just on a different
yeah,
platform.
yeah. It's funny because I heard somebody saying recently. They said, "Well, podcasting and it's not like radio," and I'm thinking,
Boy,
"Yeah, it is.
it's more like radio
Yeah,
than
it
radio
is."
these days.
Well, you know what, and the thing is that it's I find it a lot more challenging. I mean, as opposed to back when I was working, at CFRB, and I did the morning show, and I'd have a chance to interview somebody. Here you go, Ted. You got 4 minutes. You got 6 minutes.
Yeah,
Well, wow, that's tough in itself.
I agree.
But now try to do it for 20, 30 minutes, and to keep it interesting, right?
Oh yeah, no, I think radio is alive and well, but I think we have to stop using AM and FM as the only means of delivery.
That's right. I agree with you 100%. It's like people say newspapers are dead. Well, you know what? Maybe the actual tactile piece of thing that you hold
Yeah.
in your hands, it may disappear at one point, and certainly a lot of the boxes that held those newspapers have disappeared from our streets. But if you're still getting it off your computer or off your iPhone, somebody's got to do the research. Somebody's got to write that. Somebody's got to edit
Oh
that
yeah, yeah.
stuff.
I read at minimum half a dozen newspapers every morning. The difference is they're on my MacBook.
Yeah, exactly,
And so
exactly.
again, the platform has changed, and a lot of magazines. Look at all the magazines that have disappeared because they only knew how to deliver it through your mailbox at your front door. They
Hmm.
never made the transition to a website or to podcasting or some other method of communication. But it's all about the content. Platforms are always going to change. We used to have AM only, then we had AM and FM, and then we had HD, and now we've got internet and everything else. But the content is still the content. It's still two or more people trying to engage another group of people in some form of
Yeah.
communication or entertainment.
The motion picture industry still exists, and yet I haven't been in a motion picture theater in probably half a dozen years.
I'm with you.
But I've still seen a lot of movies.
I'm with you. The future is living rooms and Netflix or some other form like Netflix. I have no
Yeah.
desire to go to a big theater anymore. I have a 65-inch TV that cost about $800, and I've got a little surround sound system, and the popcorn's free at my house.
And you can go to the bathroom as many times as you want and not miss anything at all. It's like when you watch sporting events. I'm a big fan of certain sports, and people say to me, "Oh, listen, I got a pair of tickets to go to the Jays game. You want to go?" And I think, do I want to drive? I live out in West Mississauga. Do I want to take an hour and 40 minutes and battle all that BS traffic and go and everything else and line up and pay $9 for a foot long hot dog? And
Well,
or
it's
am I rather sit here watch television where they're using 15 different cameras to bring me 15 different angles of
it's
the
it's
game?
a it's a very real consideration. In fact, in my book, the main character, one of his favorite pastimes was Sunday afternoon football, NFL football, and
Yeah,
how it was the show about the show that was as entertaining as what was actually happening on the field. If you have a
yep.
couple of really good commentators and you've got some good camera people and a good producer, I'd rather watch the game on TV than see it in person.
Well, when you think about it, like what do they say? The average NFL game, the amount of time where the ball is actually the game is in motion is only something like 18 minutes, or I can't remember the exact number, but it's
Well,
it's a tiny
the
amount.
whole game is 1 hour, and in between all that, you got them lining up, you got them, kicking and
Yeah.
running and doing everything. Yeah, I bet it probably is 18 or 20 minutes out of the entire hour.
Yeah, there's really not that much. So, and when you go to a game, when you go to an NFL game, you'll sit there sometimes and you think to yourself, "My God, what's going on here, man? Why is this taking so long?" Because there's nobody talking, telling you anything that's happening, right? You're just sitting there.
Yeah, no,
But when you watch it on television, they're filled with information and highlight reels and all kinds of great stuff.
when I lived out in
But
Vancouver for a number of years, we used to go to Seattle to watch the Seahawks, and the entire game I'm going,
right.
"What's happening? I missed that. What happened? Did he make first down?" Whereas when I'm watching on TV, they're telling me.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
Have you been tasked with the role of a state executor or expected maybe in the future you will be? Well, if so, let me make your life a lot simpler by introducing you to my friend Debbie Stanley. Debbie is the founder of ETP Canada. They specialize in estate administration. Their goal simply is to help Canadian executors understand their role and how to deal with the loved one's estate. Let's face it, there's no school for this, but ETP Canada offers services such as executor support, estate accounting, and they have a new online course called Executor Ready. It's an engaging video designed to make estate administration easier and affordable. And those are two comforting thoughts during a stressful time. So call Debbie Stanley at 1-866 309 0387. That's 1-866 309 0387. Or you can get her at info at etpcanada.ca. That's info at etpcanada.ca. Fashion to go for men on the go. Hey, it's Ted Woloshyn for Tom's Place. If you need to refresh your wardrobe this spring, visit Tom's Place and check out the new spring and summer fashions. At Tom's Place, even the new arrivals are on sale. Spring colors, new patterns, new designs, designer suits sold elsewhere for as much as $5.99. Tom is selling for $179 to $279. Selected sports jackets, regularly up to $750, are 50% off. Is a wedding on your schedule? Because we got lots of great suits. Or perhaps you need a matching vest, shoes, or accessories. If so, just ask. Looking for a tuxedo? Starting at only $5.99. Upstairs, designer suits for $100 off. Buy two, get $125 off. Buy three, get $150 off. Say hello to spring suit fashions today at Tom's Place, 190 Baldwin Street in Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
Let's talk about your book here, Like a River to the Sea. But before we get to the book, let's talk about where the idea or the concept, I believe, was born back when you were the age of 20 years of age. You lost your father. He died at the age of 47 after suffering a heart attack and several heart attacks.
Yeah.
And you were allowed in the ICU when he was taken into the hospital,
Well,
which is an oddity.
I can't imagine it happening today. And I think it only happened back then because it was 1976 and it was a small hospital smallish. It's
Mm,
called Northwestern
mm,
General, as I recall. And anyway, my dad had been taken there. He had a heart attack while driving. And over the course of the next 4 or 5 days, he went through a series of medical events that ended up with him coding, meaning his heart stopping, um,
right.
4 to 6 times at least. I wasn't really
Wow.
keeping score, but it was a lot of times. And each time it happened, the alarms would go off. The ICU, initially nurses and then doctors would enter the room and they'd begin resuscitation. And nobody asked me to leave, so I didn't. And what I saw was fascinating and scary, um,
Traumatic.
and very traumatic. But then after the first or second time this happened, my dad ripped out the breathing tube that they had in, which was in case he lost consciousness, they could keep the airway going. And
Mhm.
he was trying to tell me, and was able to tell me over the course of a couple of incidents that when he blacked out, let's say, call it dying, he flatlined. I saw it asystole. I saw the line flat. And he said, I was still near the room. I was experiencing all these things. I was having a review of my life. And he said, there was somebody with me. I couldn't see who their face was, but we were traveling together, and he said every time I went past something in my life where I knew I had done something proper and right and good, he said the feeling I had was just euphoric. But every time you went past something where he hadn't been the good guy for whatever reason, he said I felt cold, I felt afraid, I felt like I just had to avoid that emotion. And uh, after hearing this over 2 or 3 days, he convinced me very clearly that there was indeed an existence beyond that flat line of life, and
Right.
and it wasn't the pearly gates, and it wasn't heaven. People's traditional, idea of heaven.
Right.
Um, so he essentially reviewed his life, his entire lifetime, each time this happened, and the only thing stopping us from getting an absolute clearer picture was, he was obviously very distressed from a health point of view, and he was trying to bring these thoughts into words, into life. It turned out the next day they transferred him to Toronto General for open heart surgery, and he didn't make it there. He had had too much damage done to the heart. But I remember being with him in the ICU and physically out loud saying to him, if you really want to let go, it's okay. I understand that, your body is failing you. And if you're trying to hang on just for me or just for us, thank you. But at some point, if you need to let go, it's okay. And at that point, I felt a certain peace come over me that I don't know if I found again to this day, but I knew it was okay for him to leave his body.
Right.
And so I
Right.
spent years and years after that researching everything I could on it, because to me, this was not only eye opening, but basically mind blowing. Almost everything I thought I knew before, I had to put into a separate category and say, is this real? How
Did,
much of
did
this is real and how much of this is something that I've been told over the years that I've come to believe?
did you grow up in a religious family? Was it a
No, no, not at all.
spiritual?
My half of my family is Jewish. The other half was Church of England, and then my dad remarried a Catholic. But at no time did we ever have religion in the house, in my dad's house. I had a
Hmm.
grandfather trying to take me to synagogue. I had my friend Al up the road, who was a devout Polish Roman Catholic. They don't come much more devout than that, although maybe the Ukrainians. And
we haven't had a pope yet. Only they
oh,
have.
okay. He would say things to me like, and we'd be 10 years old, and he'd say, "You have to come to my church." Well, why, Al? I don't want to go to church. It doesn't interest me. You'll end up going to hell. We'll never be friends after we both die. This is two 10-year-olds talking. So
Yeah.
those were the ideas that were being ingrained into my head and everybody else's head. And one day when I discovered that, boy, there's a handful of other philosophies that seem to hit home a lot more than any religion I've looked into. And I looked into almost every religion. Right, I can't say I looked into them all, but all the major ones I looked into. Am I missing something here? And it turns out that they've been borrowing from each other these 2,000 plus
Yeah.
years. I mean, it's amazing once you start peeling back the layers of the onion, what you find. And so it turned me towards the concept of reincarnation and the concept of karma, which I use to guide my life now, the way other people use religions to guide their life.
I find that when you line up all the religions in a row, they all have one thing in common for the most part, and that's sort of be good to your fellow human being.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just they just practice it in different ways, and they show it in different
Do unto
ways.
others. And if you look at almost every, well, not every religion, there's some of them are pretty
Yeah, well,
antagonistic in
yeah.
their approach. But for the most part, it's do unto others as you'd have done unto you, and they just find different ways of wording it. But you also find that of the hundreds of gods over the years, and that's just fact. How many of them were said to have been born on December 25th? Well, there's at least 15 of them. There's only the one guy I know, and we celebrate Jesus' birthday on December 25th, and yet almost anybody will tell you he was really probably born in September and probably didn't look at all
Yeah.
like half the pictures we've seen of him. And where's the fact and where's the fiction?
Isn't the God who lives in the nice fancy house in Ottawa? Wasn't he born on December 25th as well?
Well, he
Our prime minister.
certainly wants to act like a god sometimes.
Was he not? Was isn't Justin's
You,
birthday the 25th of
you know
December?
what? I think Margaret Trudeau had two kids on December 25th. I
I
think.
I believe so.
I
Yes.
think. And
Yeah. Because I think there was a lot of controversy over that. It's like, come on. I mean, it was just like, well, yeah, how much of this was induced? Or
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, come on, come on.
Well, there's nothing like a politician to manipulate the facts.
Yeah. No, to go back to what your father's thoughts every time he recovered from a near death experience. How much of that do you think could have been what people had been telling us and people say that, when they talk about the white light and they talk about the tunnel
Yep.
and how much of that sinks into your mind so that when you go through something like that, your mind is telling you that's what you did experience, but did you really experience that?
That's a very real thing and a very common thing, for people to experience what they think they're going to experience.
Yeah.
And in this case, it happened over several occurrences in those few days, and the outcome was the same every time. So I have to look at that and say he felt that it was very, very real. The way he described it in a calm voice, weak but calm voice, was very engaging and believable to me. And and the more I read up on it, because you got to remember, mid late '70s, no internet. Anything you wanted to find, you went to a library basically, or you went to a reference library like at U of T or the Robarts Library or
Hmm.
something. Um,
Right.
it was very difficult to get information other than the mainstream information that everybody wanted to hand out to you. Is that he's in a better place now? He's in heaven. He's with his relatives, and I can since tell you it doesn't go down that way.
Yeah. And what do you think happens
Well,
when it's all over?
I think I think we are consciousness. We are energy. Einstein taught us that energy does not disappear; it just moves into another form. And I
Right.
think what happens is the life force that's in us, call it your soul, um, call it your breath, but it's what motivates this, 100 and something pounds of meat that we carry around every day. And I think we literally enter a higher and newer level of consciousness. So you, Ted, when the day comes, you'll still be Ted. You'll be on a different platform, as it were, right? You'll still be being Ted. It just won't be on this earthly plane. It'll be on something
Right.
similar, but not this earthly plane. It's
Right.
just like your podcast. In the old days, we called it radio. It's on a different
Yeah.
platform now. We call it a podcast. It's still you.
So essentially, what you're saying is we don't die. We just go into streaming.
That's right. And reruns.
That's right.
I think
He's how is your uncle? Well, he's streaming now.
I think of reincarnation as just an endless tape loop or
That's right.
replay.
That's right. The experience that you went through during this difficult portion of your life and at the end of your dad's existence, how much did that influence you down the road when it came to writing like a river to the sea?
Well, 100%. And
Okay.
I can tell you, in my early 20s, I tried writing a couple of novels, and I mean, uh, after 20, 30, 100 pages in, you realize time to throw it out. And then when the time came to, this idea, this gift that my dad had given me inadvertently, his leaving was a gift to me in terms of understanding so much more about life and spirituality. Um, when I started trying to put those thoughts into a book form, because I thought, well, this is something fascinating. That if I'm fascinated, maybe somebody else will be. I just found every copy I wrote was so droll and dry, and I just couldn't make it interesting. It was fascinating, but I couldn't make it interesting. So rather than try to do it as a self-help book, or if you do these things, this will come your way, I
Yeah.
I, I wanted to put it together as a novel, so that if you weren't totally into it, at least hopefully you're getting a good story told to you,
Yeah.
and B, I could find ways to introduce ideas that weren't hitting you over the head with an idea. It was subtly putting it in front of you to say, does this appeal to you? Because I'll tell you, karma, reincarnation mean everything to me. But I can also tell you that they don't mean anything to a large number of people. So I was trying to find a way to bridge those two divides. The fact of what happens when you die, to um, tell it to me in a way that doesn't put me to sleep or scare the heck out of me.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that that's a lot of people don't want to face. A lot of people wouldn't have this conversation that you and I are having right now. They
I
just
would say
stay
most.
away from
I
that.
would say most, to
Yeah.
be quite frank about it. On the other hand, I've been really happily surprised at the number of people who have read the book, who were either friends or acquaintances, because we have a dialogue, and people who said, "Oh my God, I had no idea you were into this metaphysical, new age, spiritual approach to life." And I'm saying, "Well, I had no idea you were into it." And they said, "Well, what you wrote in the book is what I've been thinking for the last 20 years, but couldn't put words to it." So that's what I tried to do. I tried to take, a bunch of people's thoughts about what happens when we die. Because let's face it, it's other than being born, it's the next biggest day in our life. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
except that one promotion.
Yeah. Okay.
uh, but it's such a big deal for us, and yet we let other people tell us how it's going to be. We let
Hmm.
religions tell us how we should conduct our life so that our death is as such. Hospices, other situations telling you how you should die. Well, it's a very personal thing. I think you should be allowed to do it on your own terms.
Well, and it's not even just telling you how you should die. Literally telling you when you die how you should be dead. Like you should be buried. You should not be
Oh,
cremated.
right.
Some religions are totally against that. You know.
Well, uh, you know, uh, we don't have hours and hours today to talk, but I can tell you that most things that we're taught through religions are based on ideas that people had hundreds of years after a particular event happened. Whether you're talking the I Ching, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, um, they're all basically works of fiction. None of them were written at the time that they happened. They were written hundreds and thousands of years later by many, many different people. In some cases, we don't even know who was writing it. Difficult for me
Hmm.
to look at that and say that's 100% fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and and when, and when somebody starts quoting those books to me, I think, well, are you doing this because you truly believe that, or does it work to your particular advantage or philosophy?
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to write this book, because it's another way of looking at a very familiar thing and seeing it totally differently, I think.
And it's a story of a young man who's facing death.
Well, true, and the character in this book, the main character. I mean, the description of the book says he's a very ordinary guy about to tell you an extraordinary story. And the premise of the book is that the main character tells you the story from beyond the grave.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's I'm happy to say it's a very enlightening thought process to read this book. You don't have to believe it, but do me a favor and at least think about it.
Yeah. And now you're on a sequel to this book already.
I am. I am. I started it. My girlfriend and I went away for several weeks to escape the winter, and I'm a morning person, always have been, and I'm a morning writer. It turns out, so I'd get up at 6 o'clock, go downstairs and write for 2 hours or so, and uh, yeah, I'm a good more than 10% through the book already. the follow
Uh-huh.
up. It will be very different from this book in so much as the storyline, and it doesn't tell you anything from beyond the grave, as it were. But there will be a lot of spiritual and enlightening moments in it, as this new character in the new book essentially learns what the old character Josh ended up learning, that
Hmm.
you don't die, you transform. And what we think of as an ending is actually a beginning.
And boy, I'll tell you, Paul Fisher at the age of 13, when he lost his British accent, or before that, never thought that he would have the career that he did and end up writing the kind of book that he did.
I honestly did not, but
Never saw that one coming, did you?
I will tell you, I've since come to believe that we are the architect of everything in our life. You can't blame it
I
on
was going to
anybody
say that.
else. You can't. It's not
I was
God's
good.
will. It's your will. It's your decision. It's you making the best of what you have available to you and thinking of ways of using the energy around you in ways that perhaps other people never did.
Yeah.
So it's a very eye-opening book if people are ready to just have a little glance behind the curtain.
I always believed that you are the author of your own story.
100%. And when people say anything to the contrary, I do my best to remind them that you made every choice you made. There must be a reason why you made that choice.
Yeah. Well, that part of what your dad described, what going through and envisioning your life, what you went through, and the good parts, and how good they made you feel, and the bad parts, and how you wouldn't want to re-experience that. I don't look forward to that.
No,
I got a couple of bad chapters in there, and where I'm going to go. Well, can we move
I'm
along? Can we move this right along a
I'm
little
I'm
bit?
convinced if more people understood the concept of karma, we wouldn't need half the laws that we have.
I think you're probably right. You're probably right. Now, the book is called "Like a River to the Sea." It's available pretty much, I guess, everywhere where you find novels,
Yep,
and it's the audiobook's available, and you narrated it.
I narrated it. I was delighted to manage to do that over the summer. I just
Now, what
thought,
was that?
oh,
What was that experience like as a professional broadcaster? Thinking, okay, like, are you second guessing yourself as you're doing
well,
all this?
I was a little nervous before we began doing it, and I spent 40+ years on air. I would, I'd always get a little nervous before a show or an interview or something. But
Yeah,
but
yeah,
but
for
but, but
sure.
going in to record this audiobook, uh, here's the other thing: I've only listened to one or two audiobooks in my life, so going in to record your own, it's like uh, I was. I wanted to tailor it in such a way that it was accessible for anyone listening. But I'd only heard a couple, so what I ended up doing, I think, worked out very well. It was actually with an old friend of mine who you may know. He passed away over the summer. A guy named Steve Hurray, producer guy,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
producer's choice.
yes,
That was
yes.
actually the last job that I know of that Steve worked on. He was the producer or executive producer. Bruce Hayward, another guy who you may know, was running all the controls and did the editing on it. But it ended up being about 9 hours of actual reading to get the book out. So if you're going to
Wow,
listen to it in your car going to the cottage, you'll get 2 or 3 weekends out of it.
good stuff.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. This has been a real great experience chatting with you, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you
All the
for letting
best
me
to
share
you.
a couple of ideas, and really good to see you again, Ted. I haven't seen you for a little while.
Yeah, it's been a while. I'm still here.
You're looking pretty good, let me
I
tell you.
haven't well, I haven't shaved, but that's okay. Nobody knows that. I don't know why they
I
even
haven't
admitted
in
it.
years, and nobody can tell. Well, thank you very much. I
all the
appreciate it.
all, all the best to you, Paul.
You as well.
That's going to do it for another edition of the Ted Wallishin podcast. Thanks again for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for all your comments and your suggestions. You can leave them at www.tedwoloshin, WOLOSHYN.ca. And you can find all our past podcasts there as well, and links to our sponsors. And we want to thank our sponsors, ETP Canada and Tom's Place, for their support over these last gosh, it's going to be 3 years in the fall. Wow. And they said it wouldn't last. And they said we wouldn't last either. But we're still here, and we're thanking you for that. By the way, while you're on your computer, don't forget to fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, as usual, have a great week.
The Ted Wallachin Podcast has been brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices. It's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. The Ted Wallachin Podcast is produced by Becky Coles. That's me. Technical production by Paul Gatt. Music by Bike Thieves. To talk to Ted and for more information on his podcast and our sponsors, go to www.tedwallachin.ca.